What happens when a moment meant to celebrate success turns into a silent battlefield on live television? Before we dive into the tension that unraveled between Zendaya and Sunny Hostin on The View, take a second to subscribe to Stage View and like this video, because what you're about to hear is a story that nobody expected, nobody controlled, and nobody could look away from. Now let's step inside the moment as it happened. The studio lights hit with a golden glow as the cameras rolled, catching that thin layer of nervous excitement that always hangs in the air before a major celebrity interview. Zendaya stepped onto the set with graceful confidence, her velvet suit catching the reflections of the monitors, her expression soft but focused. She offered the audience a gentle wave, one she had perfected over years of red carpets. But today, something about her eyes said she was carrying more weight than usual. Sunny Hostin, seated at the far end of the panel, adjusted her cue cards, her gaze fixed on Zendaya with a focus that seemed almost sharper than the moment required. The other hosts leaned forward, ready to dive into the interview, but the air already felt different, like two weather fronts drifting toward each other, quietly preparing to collide. Zendaya took her seat, crossing one leg over the other, offering a professional smile. The applause died down. The theme music faded, and the first question landed with a smooth, practiced rhythm. It was Whoopi easing her in. "So, Z," she said warmly, "your new film. Huge buzz, incredible performance. How are you feeling now that it's finally out in the world?" Zendaya nodded, grateful for the softer start. "It feels good. It feels surreal, honestly. We've all worked so hard. I'm proud of what we created." Her voice was steady, her demeanor calm. But across the table, Sunny's expression didn't shift. She hadn't smiled once. "Not yet," Whoopi continued. "Every time you step into a role like this, you bring something new. Something we don't expect." Zendaya smiled humbly, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "Thank you. I try." The room warmed for a moment, but it wouldn't last. Sunny cleared her throat, lifting her chin, and turned her body directly toward Zendaya. The audience sensed the shift, some subtle tightening in posture, a hush falling over the front rows. She spoke slowly, deliberately. "So," Sunny began, "there's been a lot of conversation online about how you approach roles that deal with, experiences not necessarily your own." A few audience members exchanged glances. Zendaya blinked. "I'm sorry, what do you mean?" Sunny folded her hands. "I mean the criticism. People saying you're taking on narratives that should belong to others. That you're stepping into spaces that aren't," she paused for effect, "entirely authentic to your background." A murmur rippled through the studio. Zendaya inhaled softly, her jaw tightening almost imperceptibly. "Well, I think storytelling is about connecting with human experiences." "But do you think," Sunny interrupted, "that certain roles should be reserved for people who lived them? Aren't there times when stepping aside would be more appropriate?" The tension was real now. Thick, sticky. Zendaya shifted in her seat. Not defensive, yet, but startled. She wasn't expecting this angle. Not like this. Not phrased like a challenge instead of a question. "I believe," Zendaya said carefully, "that I approach every role with respect, with awareness, and with the intention to honor real people. I don't take that lightly." Sunny raised an eyebrow. "But is that enough?" Whoopi glanced between them, sensing the collision course forming. The audience sat frozen, unsure if they were witnessing a meaningful conversation or the beginnings of something deeper, something sharper. Zendaya swallowed. "If your question is whether I should stop telling certain stories because they make some people uncomfortable, my question," Sunny cut in, her tone firmer, "is whether those stories were yours to tell in the first place." The studio audience gasped. A few hands flew to mouths. Even Joy Behar leaned back slightly, eyebrows lifting in surprise. Zendaya held Sunny's gaze, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence wasn't heavy. It was electric, charged with emotion, confusion, and something unspoken. Then Zendaya responded, her voice low but steady. "I think the idea that only people with a certain background can portray certain experiences limits storytelling. It limits art. It limits empathy. Sunny didn't look convinced. She glanced toward the crew, then back at Zendaya. But empathy isn't the same as ownership. And some viewers feel that when you take on certain roles, you're stepping into ownership of experiences that, frankly, aren't yours. Zendaya's expression faltered, just for a heartbeat. A flash of hurt crossed her eyes, so quick and buried that only those watching her closely would notice. Whoopi finally intervened, tone lighter, trying to diffuse the growing tension. Okay, we're diving straight into the deep end today. A few nervous chuckles spread through the room. Zendaya forced a polite smile, but she didn't look away from Sunny. Sunny, however, wasn't done. Let me be more specific, Sunny said, leaning forward. Some people feel that you're benefiting from certain narratives that others have lived without getting the same opportunities, the same platforms, the same attention. Zendaya inhaled hard, her fingers curling slightly on her lap. I've worked my entire life to earn my place, to create space, not take it away. And I'm not disputing your work ethic, Sunny said. But when your visibility overshadows the voices of people whose stories you're portraying. Sunny, Whoopi warned gently but firmly. No, Zendaya said, lifting a hand slightly. It's okay. The audience held their breath. Zendaya continued. If you're saying I shouldn't exist in spaces where other talented individuals also deserve opportunity, I agree. Everyone deserves that. But it's not my job alone to fix an industry that has been unequal for decades. So you're saying you're not part of the problem? Sunny asked. Zendaya froze. The air snapped, tense brittle. I'm saying, Zendaya replied carefully, that I'm aware of the privilege that visibility brings. And I'm using it to uplift others through producing, casting, mentoring. But the roles, Sunny said. Your roles. Do you ever turn them down because someone else deserves them more? Another ripple of shock moved through the room. This time, Zendaya actually leaned back, blinking in disbelief. It wasn't outrage. It was hurt mixed with confusion, as if she couldn't understand why the interview had turned into an interrogation. I choose roles based on connection, Zendaya said quietly. On the story, on whether I feel I can honor it. Sunny tilted her head. But is that connection enough justification for taking up those spaces? A woman in the audience shook her head visibly. Someone whispered, "What is she doing?" Another whispered back, "Why is she going at Zendaya like that?" Zendaya exhaled slowly, eyes lowering for a moment before she composed herself again. When she looked back at Sunny, her expression was calm, but the hurt was there, deep, steady, quietly glowing beneath the surface. I came here today to talk about a film that means a lot to me, she said. To the cast, to the crew, to the people who dedicated years of their lives. I didn't come here to defend my existence in this industry. Sunny didn't respond. She didn't blink. She didn't soften. Whoopi stepped in again. Let's bring this back, okay? But before she could redirect, Zendaya lifted her hand. No, it's fine, she murmured. She turned fully toward Sunny. If you feel that I've done something wrong, something harmful, say it plainly. The audience gasped again. A wave of shock rippled across the room like a sudden breeze. Sunny hesitated, just enough to reveal that the question had struck deeper than expected. I'm saying, Sunny replied carefully, that some viewers feel your success comes at the expense of others. Zendaya nodded slowly. And you? Is that what you feel? The room fell silent. A silence so sharp it felt like it could cut. Sunny opened her mouth, closed it, then finally said, I'm saying the conversation exists, and it needs to be had. Zendaya looked down for a moment, then breathed out. Then let's have it, she whispered. The audience shifted, realizing they were witnessing something raw, something unplanned. Two women sitting across from each other, navigating a tension that neither fully understood, shaped by a cultural pressure that neither fully controlled. Zendaya lifted her gaze again, this time with quiet determination. Ask me what you really want to ask. And that's when the energy in the studio changed completely. The lights felt harsher, the silence deeper, the cameras colder. Even the host stopped moving, as if afraid the slightest shift would break the fragile moment hanging between them. Sunny stared at Zendaya, holding the unspoken question between them like a blade. And in that suspended breath, just before Sunny answered, just before everything tipped into the conflict that would dominate headlines for days, something in both women's faces revealed the truth. This was no longer an interview. This was a confrontation, a standoff, a quiet unraveling happening in front of millions. And it had only just begun. For a few seconds, the studio felt like it was holding its breath. The audience, the hosts, even the camera operators seemed suspended in the moment, unsure whether to brace for an explosion or sit still and hope the tension passed. Zendaya waited, her eyes steady but shadowed with something deeper, something like disappointment mixed with resolve. Sunny Hostin squared her shoulders, shifting slightly in her seat as though preparing to reveal the question she had been circling around from the moment Zendaya sat down. But she didn't ask it. Not yet. Instead, Sunny exhaled slowly, her tone measured. There are people, she said, who believe that Hollywood elevates certain individuals while ignoring others who have lived the experiences that get turned into entertainment. Zendaya nodded. I don't disagree with that. Sunny raised her brows, slightly unsure of how quickly Zendaya had accepted the premise. You don't? No, Zendaya replied. Hollywood absolutely has a history of giving certain people more opportunities. That's not a secret. That's not new. Joy Behar leaned forward. I think the issue is whether you're being blamed personally for a system that existed long before you were even born. Zendaya glanced at Joy with a grateful smile, but Sunny didn't soften. I'm not blaming you for the system, Sunny said. I'm asking whether you're benefiting from it in a way that you recognize, and whether that shapes how you choose roles. Zendaya looked down for a moment, just long enough for the cameras to catch her breath slowing, her shoulders settling. She wasn't flustered. She wasn't angry. She was thoughtful, but the tension didn't fade. I'm aware, Zendaya said finally, that my platform is big. Bigger than I ever expected. And that comes with opportunities some people don't get. I know that. I'm not blind to it. Sunny jumped in. But awareness doesn't equal accountability. The audience murmured again, some shifting uncomfortably, some bracing for Zendaya's reaction. Zendaya tilted her head, studying Sunny for a moment. Are you asking if I should feel guilty? Sunny hesitated. Not guilty. Responsible. Zendaya's jaw tightened. Responsible for what? For being visible? For working hard? For being chosen for roles? Sunny didn't blink. For taking roles that some people feel should go to others. There it was again, the core of the confrontation. The accusation without being spoken as one. Zendaya breathed out through her nose, almost a soft laugh, but not a humorous one. More like disbelief at the endless loop of the same question, reframed again and again with sharper angles. Sunny, Zendaya said, lowering her voice, I can't fix the industry by rejecting opportunities. That doesn't help anyone. It just puts someone else in the position of carrying blame they didn't create either. But don't you think, Sunny pressed, there's a difference between fixing the industry and choosing not to take space that isn't meant for you? Whoopi shifted uncomfortably. Okay, hold on. I think what we're not doing here is giving Zendaya the space to actually respond fully before we jump back in. But Sunny didn't back down. I'm letting her respond, Sunny said. I'm asking questions people are asking. But you're giving her no chance, Whoopi countered. Let her speak without cutting her off. The audience applauded lightly, but it wasn't celebratory. It was supportive. A room full of people recognizing imbalance and trying to navigate it. Zendaya lifted her hand gently. It's fine, Whoopi. I want to answer. The applause died. The silence returned. Zendaya turned back to Sunny, her expression open but wounded. If you want to know whether I weigh my decisions carefully, the answer is yes. Every role I take means something to me. I don't say yes to things just to say yes. Sunny's tone softened in the slightest measure. Not enough to change the tension, but enough to show she was listening. And if you want to know whether I step aside, yes. I have. Many times. But nobody sees the roles I don't take. Nobody hears the conversations behind the scenes. They only see the roles I accept. The audience nodded, some clapping gently. Zendaya continued, "But I'm also trying to use my career to create new spaces, to produce stories, to cast new talent, to bring people into rooms they weren't invited into before." Sunny tapped her cue cards lightly. "I acknowledge that, truly. But for some people, that still doesn't erase the question." Zendaya tilted her head. "Then ask it." Sunny paused. The tension thickened again, hotter, heavier, more suffocating than before. Almost as if the truth behind Sunny's line of questioning was too heavy to say aloud. Then Sunny finally spoke. "Some people believe you're taking roles that belong, specifically, to darker-skinned women." The room exploded, not loudly but emotionally. The gasps were collective. Sharp, audible. Shock rippled through the space like a wave striking glass. Zendaya's face went completely still. All expression drained from her features. Not in anger, not in shock, but in something deeper. Something painful. Something she had heard whispered behind her career for years, but never expected to face this directly on live television. "Wow," Joy whispered under her breath. Whoopi pinched the bridge of her nose. The audience sat stunned, some shaking their heads, others staring with widened eyes. Zendaya blinked once. Slowly, her hands clasped together, her fingers trembling only slightly. So barely that the cameras might not have picked it up, but those sitting closest certainly did. When she spoke, her voice wasn't raised. It wasn't defensive. It wasn't argumentative. It was soft. Dangerously soft. "I have never taken a role from a darker-skinned woman," Zendaya said, her voice steady despite the faint tremor of emotion behind it. "That accusation is rooted in colorism. And I will not sit here and pretend I'm unaware of my lighter complexion. I'm not blind. I know how Hollywood works. I know the privilege that skin tone brings. I've spoken about it openly." Sunny didn't interrupt this time. She simply listened. "But to imply," Zendaya continued, voice thickening at the edges, "that I knowingly take roles meant for someone else, that's not just hurtful. It's untrue." Her eyes glistened, not with tears, but with the sting of being misunderstood, misrepresented, and asked to defend herself for something she never claimed or desired. A few audience members clapped softly, attempting to lift the mood, but the moment was too heavy to break. Zendaya swallowed. "I've spent my entire career trying to bring more representation into Hollywood, trying to open doors, trying to create opportunities. And yes, that includes talking about colorism, because it exists. And pretending it doesn't would be dishonest. But I don't choose roles to silence anyone. I choose roles because I connect to the story and because I believe I can honor it." Sunny spoke gently this time. "I didn't say you did it intentionally. But you implied it," Zendaya said. "And intention matters, but so does implication." The air was quiet again, but different, thicker, more emotional. Sunny leaned in. "I'm bringing up what people are saying because I think it's important to address. You have a massive platform. Everything you do impacts conversations everywhere." Zendaya nodded, slowly, painfully. "I know. And that's why I'm so careful. Why I'm so intentional. Why I produce projects that highlight young Black girls whose stories deserve to be told by them, not through me." Sunny softened a little. "I respect that." But Zendaya shook her head. "No, you didn't come here to respect me. You came here to challenge me." Another visible spark in the air. The audience let out a collective exhale, a sound almost like a gasp. And Sunny didn't deny it. "I came here," Sunny said slowly, "to have a conversation that I think matters." Zendaya stared at her for a moment, studying her, trying to understand the motivation behind the intensity. And in that moment, something shifted, an acknowledgement of the tension, of the misunderstanding, of the crossroads they had arrived at. Zendaya lowered her voice. "Do you think I'm the face of a problem I'm also trying to dismantle?" Sunny hesitated. The pause was the answer. Zendaya nodded slowly, as though she had expected it. Whoopi rubbed her forehead. Joy looked uncomfortable. Sarah Haynes sat stiff, unsure whether to intervene or remain silent. Zendaya continued, voice low. That's unfair. Sunny didn't argue. She simply said, maybe. The moment was a knife, sharp, cold, slicing through the air with precision. The camera zoomed in slightly on Zendaya, capturing the hurt she was trying so hard to keep from spilling out. Her voice wavered just once. You don't know what I do behind the scenes, she said. You don't know the people I've fought for. You don't know the conversations I've had with studios, with producers, with casting directors. You don't know what I say in private rooms that never make headlines. Sunny opened her mouth, but Zendaya continued. You see the roles I take, but not the ones I pass. You see the spotlight, but not the shadows behind it. You see the results, but not the work. A tear didn't fall, but it nearly did. She blinked it back with practiced grace, her composure bending under the emotional weight, but not shattering. The audience sat with their breath trapped in their throats, stunned by the rawness of her response. Sunny's voice softened. Zendaya, I'm not attacking you. Zendaya looked at her, her expression tired. Then why does it feel like you are? Sunny didn't answer. She couldn't. And that silence was louder than anything she could have said. Zendaya took a slow breath, pressing her palms together as though grounding herself. The room watched her, hanging on the way her chest rose and fell. I didn't come here to fight, she whispered. I came here to celebrate a project I care deeply about. Sunny nodded. And I understand that. But you derailed it, Zendaya said, not cruelly, not angrily, but honestly. Painfully honestly. Sunny's expression shifted, just slightly. A flicker of realization, of regret, of awareness that maybe the line between journalism and provocation had blurred in real time. Whoopi finally stepped in. Let's take a breath here. Someone in the audience muttered, please. Joy added, we should talk about the movie. The cast is watching this right now like, what is happening? Laughter rippled nervously. Zendaya managed a small smile, but the hurt hadn't faded. Then, almost as if fate decided the moment wasn't explosive enough, a voice from the audience shouted, why are you attacking her like that? The studio froze. Sunny's eyes widened. Zendaya turned slowly, surprised. The producers panicked, waving their hands, trying to silence the audience interruption. But it was too late. The tension in the air snapped. And that outburst, that single voice, would ignite the next phase of the confrontation. A phase that would take the already heavy moment and drag it into headlines, social media firestorms, and conversations far bigger than the room itself. The standoff wasn't over. It was escalating. And part 3 would reveal how fast a quiet spark could turn into a public blaze. For a moment, the audience members' shout hung in the air like a thunderclap, reverberating through the studio. A dozen heads turned at once, toward the voice, toward the hosts, toward Zendaya, toward Sunny. No one knew what to do. The producers, sitting behind the cameras, exchanged frantic looks as if deciding whether to cut to commercial or let the moment breathe. But the moment breathed on its own, sharp, trembling, full of heat. Sunny blinked, startled in a way she rarely was. She'd been in heated conversations before, on and off camera, but something about this one, this moment, this accusation, this tension, had shaken her equilibrium. Zendaya turned toward the audience, her expression softening the second she saw the concern etched across their faces. People weren't angry at her. They were worried for her. And that realization seemed to hit Zendaya with bittersweet force. Whoopi lifted a hand toward the audience. All right, she said, trying to settle the sudden rumble. Let's keep it respectful. But the shout had already broken an invisible barrier. The studio no longer felt like a controlled environment, no longer felt safe or predictable. It felt like a storm cloud had burst open and drenched the room in raw, unfiltered emotion. Sunny steadied herself, inhaling, exhaling, placing her hands flat on the table. I'm asking questions, she said, her voice quieter than before, but no less firm. This is The View. We ask tough questions here. The audience member called back. But she's not a punching bag. A collective gasp rolled through the rows. Zendaya's eyes widened, not in fear, but in alarm. This wasn't what she wanted. She didn't want Sunny attacked. She didn't want the audience turned into a weapon. She didn't want the interview spiraling into a battlefield of sides. She raised her hand again gently. "Please," she said softly, her voice carrying across the room with surprising strength. "Let's not do that. Please." The studio fell into a hush. Zendaya continued. "This isn't about attacking anyone. We're having a difficult conversation, yes. But it's still a conversation." Sunny looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time since the tension began. Not as a journalist facing a subject, not as a host facing a guest, but as a person sitting across from another person who was struggling to maintain composure under intense scrutiny. Zendaya turned back to Sunny, her voice steady but fragile around the edges. "I'm not here to be defended, and I'm not here to be torn apart. I'm here because I respect platforms like this. I respect conversations like these." Sunny swallowed, her throat tightening. Zendaya's voice dropped almost to a whisper. "But I need you to respect me too." The words landed like a quiet punch. Not loud, not showy, but devastating in their softness. Sunny opened her mouth, but no immediate response came. Her breath hitched. She shifted in her seat, her fingers tapping anxiously against the table. For the first time, she seemed unsure of herself, uncertain of how far she had pushed, uncertain if she had crossed a line. Whoopi sighed and leaned back. "Can we please talk about the movie?" she asked, half pleading, half commanding. But neither Zendaya nor Sunny looked ready to move on. Joy, always the one to break uncomfortable silences with humor or logic, tried to step in. "You know," she said lightly, "I think sometimes we forget that people come here with expectations of celebrating their work, not defending their souls." A soft, scattered laugh rippled through the audience. It was a fragile laugh, thin, brittle, but present. It eased the tension by a fraction. But the moment wasn't healed. The wound was still open. Zendaya kept her eyes on Sunny. "I want to answer your questions," she said. "I really do. But I need to know why this tone? Why this approach? Because it doesn't feel like a conversation. It feels like an accusation." Sunny's eyes glistened, not with tears, but with conflict. An internal tug-of-war playing out behind the polished composure she usually carried with ease. Finally, Sunny exhaled. "I didn't intend it to feel like that." Zendaya studied her. Didn't intend it? Or didn't realize it? Sunny looked away. And that was the answer. Zendaya leaned back in her chair, trying to gather herself. The tension didn't dissipate. It simply shifted into something deeper, more personal, almost somber. Sunny looked at her again. "When you're in my position," she said quietly, "you have to ask the questions people are asking." "I get that," Zendaya said. "Truly, I do. But there's a difference between asking and attacking." Sunny winced. The word attacking carried weight. "Do you feel attacked?" Sunny asked. The studio waited, breathless. Zendaya hesitated, and that hesitation was painful. "It felt unfair," Zendaya said finally. "Like I walked into something I wasn't told I'd be facing." Joy nodded. "We usually set expectations better. That's on us." Sunny straightened. "I didn't ambush her." But her voice wasn't as confident as it had been 30 minutes earlier. The room felt different now, like the energy had shifted from confrontation to reflection, though the wounds were still fresh. Zendaya looked down, fidgeting with the ring on her finger. A subtle tremor rippled through her hands, but she forced them still. "I've been criticized all my life," she said softly. "Since I was a kid. People analyzing my skin tone, my hair, my roles, my success, my everything. I'm used to it. It's part of the job. But this moment, it felt personal." Sunny whispered, "It wasn't." "But it felt like it," Zendaya said. "And that matters." The audience murmured sympathetically. Zendaya continued, voice trembling slightly. "I'm not perfect. I know that. I've made mistakes. I've learned. I've listened. I've tried to do right. But sitting here, answering questions about whether I'm taking something from someone, whether I'm winning at the expense of someone else's pain, that hurts. More than you know." Sunny's expression cracked. A moment of pure, unfiltered vulnerability washed across her face. She pressed her lips together, fighting the instinct to defend herself. She inhaled slowly. Zendaya, I could have said things better. The audience murmured agreement. Zendaya nodded. I'm not asking for an apology. I'm asking for understanding. Sunny whispered, I hear you. The tension began to loosen, slightly. Not dissolved, not forgotten, but softened, like the pressure in the room had finally found a way to exhale. But then, just as the atmosphere began to settle, a producer spoke into the host's earpieces, loud enough for the audience to sense something was wrong. Whoopi frowned. Okay, I'm being told. Just hold on. She listened, eyes widening. We can't cut to commercial yet. Something's happening online already. Joy blinked. Online? Already. Sarah leaned closer. It's trending. The producer's signal confirmed it. Whoopi sighed. Apparently, clips of this interview are being uploaded in real time. The audience gasped. Zendaya closed her eyes briefly, feeling a weight crash into her chest. The world outside the studio was already watching, dissecting, forming opinions, building narratives. Sunny's eyes darted toward the cameras with a tight expression that almost resembled panic. But we're not done yet. Context matters. The producer gestured frantically. Too late. A ripple of dread moved through the set. Zendaya whispered, Oh God. Sunny frowned. This is exactly what I didn't want. Zendaya looked at her, pained. Didn't want. Sunny, this entire conversation was a spark. And now the whole world is watching it burn. Sunny didn't argue. She couldn't. And suddenly the room wasn't heavy with tension. It was heavy with consequences. Whoopi stood, half out of her chair. Okay, we need to reset. We need to finish this properly. But it was already spiraling. Audience members pulled out their phones. Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. Everything was lighting up. Notifications buzzing. Cameras flashing. Clips being recorded and shared. Others reacting on their own screens. Joy muttered under her breath. We're not even off air, and it's already chaos. Zendaya stared at the ground, the weight of the moment thick around her. This is going to get twisted, she said softly. People are going to turn it into something it wasn't. Sunny pressed a hand to her forehead. Then let's clarify. But Zendaya shook her head. It doesn't matter. The internet's writing the story already. Sunny exhaled shakily. That's not fair. Zendaya looked at her, eyes gleaming with something more complex than anger. Something between fear and exhaustion. Neither was this. The words cut cleanly through the room. The audience fell silent again. Not the charged silence from before, but a heavier, more uncertain one. A silence that tasted like regret. Whoopi signaled to the stage manager again. We have to finish strong. We have to control the narrative. Zendaya whispered, We can't. Sunny looked stricken. And for the first time since the confrontation began, it wasn't hostility that filled the space between them. It was dread. Not for the interview, but for the aftermath. Whoopi inhaled deeply. Okay, let's take the reins back. But before she could continue, a second voice from the studio audience shouted. She didn't deserve that. Zendaya flinched. Sunny closed her eyes. The producers scrambled. And The View, usually a structured, lively morning show, had become a live, unfiltered emotional storm. A storm that hadn't yet reached its peak. Because the fallout was still coming. The headlines, the commentary, the accusations, the defenses, the public picking sides. And part 4 would reveal how the confrontation not only shattered the studio's calm, but ignited a firestorm that traveled far beyond those walls, landing in the laps of millions across the world. The second shout from the audience struck the studio like a breaking wave, louder than the first, heavier, charged with raw emotion. It wasn't just a comment. It was a spark tossed onto a field already dry and cracking from tension. Within seconds, producers were signaling frantically, raising hands, gesturing toward security, whispering into headsets with the frantic energy of a moment spiraling out of control. Zendaya sat perfectly still, as if the noise had frozen her in place. Her eyes darted briefly toward the audience, where a woman stood clutching her phone, shaking with adrenaline. It wasn't anger in her face, it was protectiveness. Fierce, unfiltered protectiveness. And that expression sent pressure rippling down Zendaya's spine. Sunny watched it too, and for the first time she looked genuinely shaken. Not annoyed, not defensive, shaken. As if she finally understood the weight of the moment. As if the realization hit her like a cold wind. This was no longer an interview. This was no longer a conversation. This was a national flashpoint unfolding in real time. Whoopi held out her hands toward the audience. "We're going to calm down," she said firmly, her voice commanding enough to quiet the room. "We're having a conversation, not a fight. Please let us finish." The studio settled, slowly, reluctantly, like a wave pulling back from the shore, but leaving a trembling imprint behind. Zendaya finally exhaled, a slow, shaky breath she'd been holding far too long. She pressed her palm to her knee, grounding herself. The lights felt hotter now, harsher. Almost accusatory. Sunny swallowed hard. "Zendaya," she said quietly, "I don't want this to become something ugly." Zendaya didn't look at her. Not intentionally, just because her eyes seemed pinned to the table, tracing some invisible line in the wood. "It's already ugly," she whispered. The words cracked open the silence again. Joy reached forward, her voice gentle. "Look, we're human beings. Sometimes conversations go places we don't expect. Sometimes they get messy." Zendaya nodded softly without lifting her eyes. Sunny cleared her throat. "I think it's important." But Zendaya held up a hand. It wasn't sharp. It wasn't rude. It was tired. "Please," Zendaya murmured. "Just let me talk. Just for a moment." The studio waited. Sunny leaned back, conceding the space. Zendaya breathed in through her nose, gathering herself like someone picking up fragments of glass, carefully, painfully, trying not to bleed. "When I walked in here today," she said, her voice low but stronger now, "I wanted to talk about a film I poured myself into. A film that means everything to me. My cast, my crew, they trusted me to speak about it with love, with pride, with joy." Her voice wavered at the last word. "But instead, we're talking about whether I deserve my place in this industry." Sunny's eyes softened, but Zendaya continued before she could speak. "And maybe that conversation is important," Zendaya went on. "Maybe it is. But not like this. Not through confrontation. Not through implication. Not through making someone feel like they have to shrink themselves on live television just to prove they're worthy." The audience murmured, supportive, emotional, aching for her. Zendaya lifted her head finally, locking eyes with Sunny. Her expression wasn't angry. It wasn't harsh. It was simply honest. "I've spent years talking openly about colorism, about privilege, about responsibility. I've never hidden from it. I take accountability seriously. But today, it felt like you weren't asking for accountability. It felt like you were asking for guilt." Sunny opened her mouth, but Zendaya pressed on. "I can't carry guilt for something I didn't choose. I can only carry responsibility for what I do with the platform I've been given. And I promise you, I'm doing everything I can behind the scenes to give others opportunities." Silence blanketed the studio. Sunny's lips trembled slightly. "Zendaya, I wasn't trying to." Zendaya interrupted gently. "I know, but intention doesn't erase impact." The audience mm'd in unison, soft, reflective, understanding the truth in her words. Sunny sat back, her composure cracking. She blinked several times, as if trying to steady herself. "You're right," she said finally. "You're absolutely right. And I'm sorry for the way it came across. Truly." The apology stunned the room. Zendaya's eyes widened slightly. Not expecting it, not demanding it, but absorbing the sincerity in Sunny's voice like a balm she didn't know she needed. Whoopi nodded, visibly relieved. "Thank you," she said softly. The studio released a collective breath it had been holding for what felt like an eternity. Zendaya's voice trembled as she replied, "Thank you for saying that." Sunny nodded, the tension draining from her shoulders. "I respect you, more than you know, and I didn't mean to make you feel cornered." Zendaya looked at her, really looked at her, and something in her expression softened. Not fully healed yet, but loosening. Thank you, Zendaya whispered again. It could have ended there, a moment of catharsis, apology, understanding. But the world outside the studio wasn't interested in nuance. The producer signaled again, almost panicked now. Whoopi shook her head. What now? The producer mouthed. Trending. Everywhere. Joy leaned over, squinting. What's trending? The producer pulled out his phone, showing the screen to the hosts. And they all saw it. A clip. 17 seconds long. Zendaya versus Sunny Hostin live fight on the View flushed face fire. Already at 400,000 views. Already with 1,000 comments. Already edited with dramatic sound effects and captions. Zendaya paled. Sunny's face crumpled. Oh no, Sunny whispered. They cut out the context. Zendaya pressed her hand to her forehead. Of course they did. Within minutes, more clips surfaced. Each one shorter, more sensational, more misleading. Zendaya dragged on The View. Sunny Hostin exposes Hollywood favoritism. Zendaya gets called out for colorism. Whoopi snapped. We're not even off the air. But the internet didn't care. The internet never cared. Zendaya slumped slightly in her chair, overwhelmed. My mom is going to call me, she muttered softly. My team, my cast. Sunny leaned forward, regret flooding her eyes. Zendaya, this isn't your fault. But Zendaya didn't answer. Not because she disagreed, but because she was already imagining the fallout. The articles, the speculation, the people twisting her words, twisting Sunny's words, turning a difficult conversation into a feud neither of them wanted. The View's theme music played faintly underneath the producer's countdown, a reminder that the show still had to end, chaos or not. Whoopi straightened, exhausted. We're going to wrap up today's show, she said. But before we go, I want to say something. The audience leaned in. Conversations get messy. Feelings get hurt. People misunderstand each other. But what matters is how we move forward. These two women handled this with honesty and respect. She turned to Zendaya. You showed grace. Then to Sunny. And you showed accountability. The audience applauded, softly, then louder, rising into a wave of support. Zendaya wiped the corner of her eye discreetly. Sunny exhaled shakily. Joy chimed in. Let's all remember, the world doesn't need more division. It needs more conversations like this, hard ones, brave ones. And with that, the cameras faded to black. But the story was far from over. Because the moment the broadcast ended, a storm erupted online. The clip spread like wildfire across platforms, TikTok, Instagram, X, YouTube, Reddit. Comment sections exploded. Reactions poured in from celebrities, journalists, fans, critics. Some took Zendaya's side. Some took Sunny's. Some twisted both of their words. Think pieces appeared within hours. Live streams. Reaction videos. Hashtags like hashtag Stand with Zendaya and hashtag Sunny was right trended simultaneously, clashing thousands of times per minute. By sunset, entertainment networks were replaying the clip non-stop. And Zendaya, sitting alone in her car outside the studio, watched the world dissect a moment that still felt raw on her skin. Her phone vibrated non-stop. Are you okay? We're here for you. Ignore the noise. You handled that perfectly. Sunny sat backstage, head in her hands, knowing this wasn't the conversation she intended to ignite. Both women felt bruised, not by each other, but by the world watching them like spectators at an emotional boxing match. And yet, somehow, beneath the chaos, there was something strangely powerful about the moment. Two women had confronted something real, something uncomfortable, something fragile and complicated, something bigger than either of them. And it had left a mark. On them. On the audience. On everyone watching. Now, it leaves a question for you. What do you think really happened in that moment? Was it accountability? A misunderstanding? An ambush? A necessary conversation that spiraled out of control? Tell us in the comments, because your voice is part of this story too. And make sure you subscribe to Stage View for more dramatic deep dives, cinematic storytelling, and explosive celebrity moments like this one. Your reaction matters. Your perspective matters. And the next story is already waiting.